When talking about a game series that shares the same cosmology across different titles, you will encounter a lot of polemic, especially for the Honkai series, where games differ a lot in terms of gameplay and target demographic. That is why every time Honkai Impact is referenced in Honkai Star Rail, you will see a lot of people who play only HSR being upset, or at least slightly off-put by the fact that Hoyo chooses to add story elements that reference older titles. And look, I understand, people don't want to feel like they need to play another game in order to understand the game they are playing now, but HoYoverse carefully crafted their stories, for the most part, so that you don't require context from the older games, but at the same time, they will reward people who have played the series for a long time. And that's also why channels like myself exist, to help you understand the lore of the series through the lenses of multiple games without you needing to pick up those games if you don't want to. Welcome! Today we are talking about Coralie, Naralab and all the new Permanence lore that was revealed in the latest chapter of Honkai Impact 3. People might think that the Honkai devs only put Honkai Impact 3 references in Honkai Star Rail, but trust me, they also put a lot of Honkai Star Rail stuff in Honkai Impact 3. But Honkai Impact 3 is not that popular, so not many people talk about it, especially in part 2. The aim of this video is to explain how the concept of permanence was explained and interpreted in Honkai Impact 3. First of all, let's explain the path of permanence. In HSR, we learned that the permanence is a path corresponding to the eon long. Paths are basically congregations of imaginary energy born as manifestations of universal philosophical concepts. People can also tune into these paths and draw powers from them, becoming what we call path striders. Each path is associated with an eon, a higher dimensional being who is the embodiment of the path itself. In the case of the permanence, the eon presiding over it is called Long. We don't really know much about Long, only that they had the appearance of a Chinese dragon possessing a snake-like body with 4 limbs. They were also known as the progenitor of all dragons and were the creator of a group of entities known as the Science of Permanence. Among this group, we have Naralab in Honkai Impact 3 and the Vidyadhara in Honkai Star Rail. Rather than being regular path striders, the Science of Permanence are more like the children of Long. I also want to clear out the misconception that Naralab is a Vidyadhara. No, she is not. There are many species in the universe that are Science of Permanence, and while there are many similarities between them, they are technically not the same species. At this point, I feel like it's safe to assume that every dragon-like entity in the Honkai universe is a scion of Long, or connected to a scion in some way. And no, Benares and Kurikara are not scions. While their looks are based on dragons, they are Honkai beasts. Another thing we know about Long is that their primary goal was seeking the meaning of life. It is said that at some point they found their answer, which became known as the revelation of the permanence. After that, Long suddenly disappeared, with many believing that they chose to reincarnate and thus abhorring biological immortality. Now that we defined what the path of permanence and who the Science of Permanence are, let's talk about how they are represented in Honkai Impact 3. In chapter 9 of part 2, we are introduced to 2 Scions of Permanence, the Calamity Dragon and Naralab. While we knew about Naralab ever since chapter 7 EX, we only found out that she is a Scion of Permanence in chapter 9. But let's start with the Calamity Dragon. Not much is known about this dragon, only that at some point it passed by Senadina's planet, which was on the verge of annihilation, and shed one of their scales, granting the people of that planet immortality through the miracle of permanence. On the other hand, Naralab, before Senadina has given her this name, described herself as a summoned star dragon. She was a dragon who visited many worlds and ended up on Laquadar, Senadina's planet, attracted by the power of permanence left by the Calamity Dragon. There, she would befriend Senadina, who gives her the name Naralab. This is also the moment when we see how both Senadina and Naralab have a difference in perspective when it comes to the interpretation of the permanence. For Naralab, the meaning of permanence is something akin to eternal preservation. As long as life is eternal, you have enough time to solve all your worries, to mend all your wounds, and get past every problem. While from Senadina's perspective, permanence is all about inheritance. What makes life enjoyable is its fleeting nature. Because we don't live forever, we learn to appreciate the small things that happen to us. We are happy when something good is happening and we are sad when something bad occurs. But if life was truly permanent, all these things would hold no value. The real value of permanence lies in passing on the torch to a new generation. Even if you die, your ideas, values, and way of thinking can be passed down to a new generation that will inherit and carry them into the future. This is a concept that is extremely relevant in Honkai Impact 3rd, especially in part 1, with the relationships between Kiana and Himeko, Bronya and Welt, Mei and the Flame Chasers, etc. In fact, I would argue that inheritance is one of the key themes of the game. The two decide to use Senadina's planet as a way to see who is right. Since everybody on this planet is immortal, Naralab would return in the future to see how things turned out. If Naralab was right, the planet should prosper due to the eternal life. But if Senadina was right, things would be far from perfect. As Naralab kept returning to Laquadar, things started to become worse and worse. An endless war fueled by greed erupted and everybody lived in fear and suffering. Naralab decided to remain and help Senadina, but after a few centuries and thousands of battles, things only got worse. It was clear that the war was never ending. That is when Senadina, broken by the endless war, asked Naralab to take her to a new planet where they will cultivate a new civilization far from the endless war. Unfortunately, if they were to leave the planet, the gift of permanence that gave Senadina her immortality would also fade, and time will catch up with her, resulting in her eventual death. Senadina was aware of this, but still wanted to live. Naralab was torn between honoring her friend's wish and take her away, ultimately causing her death in the future, or keeping her alive but condemning her to an eternity of suffering and pain. Naralab chose to honor Senadina's wish, and together with Latoast, they left Laquadar. After that, they arrived on Mars and created a new civilization. Senadina took on the role of the planet's goddess, and as her time kept running out, she also took in a girl named Layla to inherit her power and duties as goddess after her death. And from here on, we all know what happened. Layla develops an obsession for Senadina, and after her death is unable to cope with her loss, looking for every possible way to keep her memory alive, never moving on. Naralab is still looking for an answer to the question of what is permanence, but she comes to realize that Senadina's perspective was right. In the end, she dies and becomes the stone at Senadina's grave, reincarnating as Nana, the small dragon that Coralie befriends in chapter 9. Since the science of permanence can't truly die, she chooses to reincarnate and pass on her legacy to a new version of herself, just like Senadina did with Layla. At the same time, she created the space where we see Coralie in chapter 9, and at Litost's request, she agreed to grant immortality to the winners of the 10 Shoes War by preserving their souls. Also, it is revealed that because Layla was constantly blaming Naralab for Senadina's death, her memories ended up a mess and she started believing that the choice she made when she brought Senadina to Mars was wrong. Fortunately, through Coralie's help, the consciousness of the real Naralab with her memory intact is awoken and agrees to help them. Just like you can help me by subscribing to the channel and giving this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Also, don't forget to use code HOMO and my link in the description for a 10% discount to any gamer sub drink you order. Thank you. Now, let's also talk a little bit about Coralie. Coralie's growth in this entire arc comes from how she's dealing with the idea of death. Fear of death is something extremely normal that we all go through in different moments of our lives. In Coralie's case, we're introduced to this theme in the story when we see a flashback of her mourning the passing of her dog, Toto. Coralie was angry at Einstein because she refused to use the Abyss Flower to bring Toto back to life, despite her being immortal. We later learned that the reason why Einstein didn't want to do something like that was because she is someone who has lived a very long life and understands how hard eternal life can be. It's a fate she doesn't want others to experience, but of course Coralie didn't understand yet. At the end of chapter 6, we see Coralie dying after getting stabbed by Latoast, which due to Latoast's authority resulted in the severing of her consciousness from her physical body. After Hylia defeated Latoast, Coralie woke up in Naralab's domain where she encountered Nana and took upon herself to pass the trials of permanence and achieve immortality. Through these trials, we see Coralie experience different scenarios in which she is granted eternal life and experiences all the suffering and pain living forever can bring. You are doomed to an eternity of loneliness, seeing everybody around you dying, always drifting without a purpose. Everything you achieve, every relationship you build, all will crumble in front of you, leaving you as nothing more than a shallow hollow of your former self. During the last trial, Coralie gets to relive the tragic past between Senadina and Naralab on Laquadar, from Naralab's perspective. In the end, Coralie makes the same choice as the real Naralab to get Senadina, or Hylia in this case, away from the planet, even if she's basically signing her death sentence. But when she's about to make the choice, Naralab's incomplete lingering image intervenes and overrides Coralie's actions. In the end, Coralie and Nana confront her, and Coralie refuses to accept the gift of permanence after realizing that living forever will not bring anybody true happiness. After defeating Naralab's minions and awakening her complete consciousness, Naralab agrees to grant Coralie her power in order to help Hylia subdue Layla, who goes on a rampage later, but that's a topic for another video. The idea is that in the end, Coralie, although still afraid of dying, realized that living forever is a much worse fate. She accepted her imminent end and marched forward in order to help her friends. She even held her own funeral speech, but fortunately, the people outside managed to reconnect her consciousness to her real body. Now, Coralie is able to return to the real world, and she also inherited Nana's powers, which brings up the question, is Coralie a Permanence pet strider now? And honestly, I don't know. Pets are not really a defined concept in Honkai Impact 3rd, so they never really address it. The only confirmed pet strider in Honkai Impact 3rd is Vita. What's sure is that Coralie is indeed using the power of permanence. Personally, I wouldn't say that she is a pet strider per se, but more so a sign of permanence by proxy. She didn't tune with the pet of permanence like a pet strider would normally do. She's more so inherited these powers from Naralab. I really liked how this chapter handled the idea of death and permanence. On one hand, we have Naralab and Senadina giving two different answers to the question, what is the meaning of permanence? One interpreting permanence as the passing of the torch, while the other as eternal life. After witnessing Senadina's resolve, Naralab accepts her version of permanence as a genuine one. Then we also have Coralie, a person who was always afraid of dying, understanding that eternal life can be a fate far worse than death. While the idea of death is scary, it's also the very concept that allows us to truly live. I personally went through a similar situation in my teenage year. I didn't become a dragon godlike being, I was more so afraid of that, but you get the point. I was also concerned with the idea of death, fear, nothingness, and always wondered if anything I do has any meaning. Fortunately, I managed to get over it and start living life without thinking too much about it. At the end of the day, what's life if not a series of coping mechanisms only to delay the inevitable? So why not enjoy the journey while it lasts?